Greetings and welcome to another edition of the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, anywhere on God's green earth. This is your platform for education, liberation, and edification. This is the Red Pill Diaries, and I'm your host, your brother, and your friend, Rasheed. Thank you all for joining us again on this edition of the Red Pill Diaries, the Red Pill Journals, where we'll be broadcasting on Odyssey, Rumbles, Locals, the Red Pill Journals, the Red Pill Diaries, Twitch, and Twitter. Thank you all for joining me. We're waiting for Demetrius to make it to the booth. Hold on one second, everybody. Randy Zerg is in the building. Shout out to everybody who's joining us. Hold on one second. Let me let him know we're live. Because sometimes he gets the schedule mixed up. Sometimes we do this, especially when we're on different times and everything, and we're on the move and on the go. That's why I don't get bent out of shape if a guest has to cancel for a minute or has to redo the show or something like that. It's because I understand. Doing a show, I truly understand. Hold on, everyone. Let me also join us Friday at 11 a.m. Friday, we're going to have your guy, the most popular guy on YouTube. My colleague Scott Ritter will be back with us. He just hit me up right before the show. So Scott will be here 12 Eastern, 11 Central Time, my time. Hold on, everybody. Give me a second. Let me let Demetrius know we are live. Oh, here he is. All right. Oh, here. I don't even have to let him know. He said he's running a few minutes late. All right. He left me a message. Hold on, everybody. Boom. So we'll be expecting Demetrius in the building soon. So everybody who's waiting for him, he just hit me up. He said he's just running a few minutes late. And I understand that. Again, I tell you that. But, man, I can't wait to talk to Demetrius because there's a lot of things I want to pick off his brain because Demetrius is like a world traveler. The man is a lawyer. He's a journalist, a philanthropist, everything, you know. And so he's been in Lebanon. As a matter of fact, he graced us one time with a live interview from, he was either in, it was in Baghdad. He was in one of the Middle Eastern cities while the escalation between occupied Palestine and Palestine was going on. So when he gets in, if you guys want to pose a question, I will be looking in the chat, and you'll be able to ask a question, and I'll run some of the questions whenever I can towards him to see if he will answer your questions. Okay, and I'm pretty sure Demetrius will. But until Demetrius joins us, I have to give a shout out to my guy, Random. I'm always messing up Random's name, Random Zerg. I'm always messing it up, but I want the first person in the chat. So the name of the show today is called Live, a Redo or Redo, Geopolitics with Dimitri Lascaris. And as soon as Demetrius come, we're gonna try to pick his brain with as many questions as we can, okay? And for those of you who think I'm lying about anything, there it is right here up here. Oh, you can't see it. The screen is blurred. But he was saying he's running a few minutes late, so he'll be with us, okay? Now, I want, since he's not here yet, let us pace ourselves and let us go to something real quick. You know, there was a terror attack in southern Russia yesterday, Sunday. Well, it had to be Saturday our time and being reported Sunday because when it's Saturday, it's Sunday, I believe, in Russia. So something like that. But there was a attack, and I'm telling you, I don't care. I have no evidence, but I have a pattern. And as I tell everybody, when there is an investigation, the detectives and the police, they always look for motive, opportunity, and who benefits the best, the most. And when they look at that, they also see who are the criminals in the neighborhood, and they go question the criminals. They also, or former criminals, I should say, they also look at the track record, whether you know it or not. They're already looking at your past history, and they're questioning you, and they're asking you certain questions along the pattern of your criminal history, right? So now, when we look at the bombing that took place in southern Russia yesterday, what's amazing is I have a video, and I may play it on later on another show, either tonight or tomorrow, with an Israeli official saying that Russia will be forced to pay because Russia has taken the side of Palestine, and that Russia is aiding, so that now that Israel will up the ante and Israel will make Russia pay a heavy price. I have the video, the clip of it. Also, and so I'm not just telling you something. I'm telling you something that's tangible, that can be proven, that can be listened to, that can be watched. All right. On top of that, if we look at the previous bombings, all of them had Mossad, MI6 or MI5, and CIA written all over them. And as I always tell you all, these three groups, the Mossad, the CIA, and the MI6 or MI5, whichever, I forget which one. I think it's MI5 that does the international intelligence, and I can have it backwards. And the MI6 that does the domestic intelligence for Britain. I can have it backwards, but you know what I'm talking about at this moment. When you look at those three organizations, they're one and the same. Out of chaos comes order. So what they try to do is create a level of chaos, but it is almost like a controlled chaos under their control. And as they spread terror, they bring in their type of order, right? That is what is taking place in Russia. And again, I have to say this before I go into an explanation on this. A deeper explanation on this, I should say. Russia is inviting a lot of these attacks. I know nobody want to hear it, but Russia is inviting some of these attacks. And why am I saying that? It's because Russia continues to play by international law. Russia continues to trumpet the rules, while this man is not even thinking about considering playing by international law on this side. Listen, if you've ever had to fight or had to mud wrestle, let's just say mud wrestle, the only way to subdue your opponent is to get in the mud with them. You can't beat the opponent by standing outside the mud wrestling ring. You can't beat your opponent in the boxing ring by not entering the ring. You can't beat your opponent in the octagon by refusing to enter into the ring. Now, when you are fighting this opponent and you're learning that this opponent is dirty, low down, and has a lot of tricks. Here's Demetrius right now. I'll bring him in. And that's my guy right there. How's it going today?
Good, brother. Thank you. So sorry for being late again. I had another interview I had to do, and it went longer than I expected. But pleasure to be back.
Man, it's cool. It's great to have you back. It's cool. And like I was telling the people, I say this man has a million hats on, lawyer, journalist, and everything else. So that's to be expected.
And yet my head is bare.
So Demetrius, tell me your take and your feel on what is actually starting to take place in the Middle East, with the Netanyahu openly talking about entering Lebanon and subduing Hezbollah.
It's interesting. I mean, it's so horrifying and fascinating all at once, because I think we truly are living through a decisive conflict, or phase of a conflict that's been going on for decades. And it's decisive not only vis-a-vis the Palestinians and the Jewish Israeli population. It's decisive in terms of the overall balance of power in the world. What we're seeing is a historic shift away from Western hegemony to, what some people call a multipolar world. One thing's for sure, wherever this is going to end up, the power of Western governments and elites, and particularly the US, to impose its or their will on the non-Western world is in rapid decline. And what's happening in West Asia and Palestine is just one sort of manifestation of this. So I was watching. I just saw a report shortly before I started doing these interviews today, that Netanyahu is talking about winding the Gaza war down, and at the same time, he and his military leaders and his colleagues in his cabinet are talking about dealing with the Hezbollah question once and for all. I think what's going on here is that his military. Another fact I should mention is that last week, the chief spokesperson for the Israeli military, Daniel Hagari, who's a rear admiral in the Israeli Navy, came right out and said, "We cannot destroy Hamas. It's not going to happen." He said sand is being thrown in the eyes of Israelis by the leadership, which, as you can imagine, precipitated a sharp reaction from Netanyahu, because Netanyahu's stated goal from day one, this is his claim. His claim was, we're going to destroy Hamas, and that's why we're going into Gaza. I think it's now become apparent to a lot of people in the world that that was never actually the objective. It's not an achievable objective. What the real objective was to create conditions in Gaza that rendered it unlivable with the Palestinian population, so that once and for all they would leave, or at least as many as possible would get out. That was the real objective. And now the Israeli military is pushing back hard on this failed supposed objective of destroying Hamas. It's extremely fatigued. It's taken huge casualties. Thousands of people have been injured in the Israeli military. According to their own statistics, well over 300 soldiers, many of whom were officers, have been killed in Gaza in combat. Numerous other ones have been killed in northern Israel in fighting with Hezbollah. They need a break. The Israeli economy is plummeting. There are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who lived in northern Israel who are saying either they won't go back or they're doubtful about whether they'll be willing to go back. And the only way they would go back is if Hezbollah is pushed north of the Litani River, which is in the southern half of Lebanon. So I think clearly the Israeli regime is in disarray. Clearly its military is hurting. The country is hurting economically. The psychology of the population, I think, has been permanently altered. They no longer feel invulnerable to resistance movements in Palestine and in surrounding countries. And when the dust has settled, and I think it's fair to say, sadly, that there's going to be a lot more death and pain and suffering. But when the dust is settled, Israel will no longer be the dominant power in West Asia. That is probably going to be, and in fact, I think already is, Iran. Whether you like Iran or not, this is just, I think, the reality. Iran and its allies are emerging as the most powerful force within the Middle East, and that's not a process that can be stopped. What we should be doing is trying to coexist peacefully with Iran and those who, like Iran, have been pushing back against Western hegemony for decades at great cost to themselves. This is, again, not an endorsement of the Iranian government. There's plenty you can criticize in the Iranian government. But there are certain geopolitical realities that we're having to come to grips with, and it's not just in West Asia. It's also in, China, the South China Sea, the Straits of Taiwan. That's another theater of this conflict. Another one, of course, is Ukraine. And then we're seeing tectonic shifts in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, where the French are getting just unceremoniously booted out of countries that they've colonized and dominated for decades. We don't talk much about that in the Western media, but that too is an extremely important development. So I think we are watching history in the making, and the real danger for us is that this ultimately leads into a nuclear war. That's what we have to be most concerned about.
You know, Demetrius, I was thinking about this whole situation with Gaza, and I was going over some information that was fed to me prior to October 7th, and now I'm looking at the whole situation. Could this be, some of this be a head fake, because the United States, before they confront Hezbollah, Israel must have a lot of U.S. forces to back it up. It must have a lot of U.S. military power in the region. And it also must be on a war footing or something like that. Now, when we look at the situation right now, America has a dock in Gaza. She has deployed over 3,000. Most people don't even know there's over 3,000 troops to Jordan. She has deployed more troops to Israel, and now there is a aircraft carrier group on its way to the Mediterranean. Could the Hamas situation have just been a small part of a major plan for the U.S. and Israel to finally, quote unquote, handle this problem called Hezbollah?
That's an extremely important and troubling question. And in fact, an Israeli newspaper, the name escapes me, just published an article stating that apparently information was leaked to this newspaper that the Netanyahu regime had detailed knowledge of the plans for Hamas to launch those attacks in October. And before that, there was an investigative reporter, I believe his name was Swan or something like that. He's based in the United States, who did approximately a 1 hour piece, which has gone viral, where this was before the leak to the Israeli newspaper, but just based on the information he was available at that point in time, he built a very compelling case that the Israeli government knew this was coming and intentionally did little or nothing to stop it. And in fact, took steps, for example, the Nova Film Festival, where a lot of the civilians were killed. Apparently, they applied for a permit to have the festival extended for a day. And the Israeli military granted the permit, even though the higher-ups had the knowledge that there might be an attack coming by Hamas of this nature. So there are a lot of important and troubling questions that the Western media typically have ignored about what knowledge the Netanyahu regime had about all of this and the Israeli military, why they didn't act upon that knowledge. And by the way, this is very similar to questions around 9/11. You know, we know that the Bush administration was getting warnings from people within the national security group and apparatus of the United States that Al-Qaeda was planning something and that there were people in the United States who were part of a sleeper cell, and they didn't do anything about it. And the Saudis, now it's emerging, it sort of should have been widely publicized back then. The Saudi regime was in communication with a number of the 9/11 attackers. So we're seeing something very similar. I mean, I think at the end, when the historical record has been settled and this has been thoroughly examined, we may ultimately come to the conclusion that this was all designed or part of a pretext for a genocidal project. Finally, for once and for all, to rid Palestine of its indigenous population and give the Israelis the pretext that they needed to launch a larger war against Iran and its allies in the region, because the Israelis simply will not tolerate a situation in which they are not the dominant power in West Asia. These are very important questions. I think the time will come when we'll have to deal with them in a more thorough and diligent manner. But right now, I think the immediate concern has to be to bring an end to the slaughter and avoid a larger conflagration. Because if it happens, we're already in a world where the risk of nuclear war is highly elevated, and huge numbers of people are being killed and dispossessed and maimed and terrorized every day, not just in West Asia, but other parts of the world that I mentioned. And the priority has to be to bring an end to the violence as quickly as possible.
And it is also like a Pearl Harbor type event, like when Roosevelt turned a blind eye and allowed them to bomb the naval ports and everything. So I tell people a lot of times, be patient and watch everything that's going on, because there's a lot of head faking going on, because the government never comes out and tells you exactly what is going on. Now, I want to transition. I want to ask you something about this recent bombing in Russia that just took place. It has all the hallmark signs of a Mossad operation, FBI, a CIA operation, and MI5 or MI6 operation. Why is Russia allowing them to do that without, in your mind, why are they allowing? They know, I'm pretty sure their intelligence agencies know who are carrying out these attacks. Why won't Russia put their foot on the gas a little bit and put pressure on them for them continually attacking these areas? Because remember, the strikes with the attackers, they had to be fed the targeting data, and at the same time, the U.S. had a drone in the air in the same area. So this is a direct act of war, and Russia is not taking it as that.
First of all, let me say I'm aware of the attacks. Last I read was last night, and there were apparently 15 police officers were killed. They shot up, I believe, 2 Orthodox churches and a synagogue. Does this whole thing, based upon what we know, stink to high heaven? Yes, it does. It stinks to high heaven. This kind of thing wasn't happening in Russia before, the Ukraine war, and particularly before the Ukrainian military was getting obliterated. So at the same time, I don't know, and it's possible this had nothing to do with Western powers or, any Western proxies. I'm skeptical about that, but it's possible. Let me just say that even if the Russians come to the conclusion correctly that somehow the West was behind these acts of terrorism, and that's clearly what they were, I hope very much that the Russian government doesn't decide to engage in a tit for tat and continues to play three-dimensional chess while Western governments play checkers and do it badly. So, for example, one of the ways in which the Russians have reacted to the authorization that was given to the Ukrainians to launch strikes deep into Russia with Western weaponry was to enter into this deal with North Korea. And, where effectively they've entered almost into a NATO-like military alliance. And it's clear that North Korea's missile technologies are very likely going to be improving dramatically, which is a serious matter for the United States and its allies in Southeast Asia, given that North Korea has atomic warheads. So another way that the Russian Federation could respond to this, who knows, maybe there's already an initiative in this regard, is that they could give the Houthis, the Ansar Allah movement in Yemen, more sophisticated missile and drone technology, take out, U.S. naval assets or British naval assets in the Red Sea or the Indian Ocean. I don't want to see any of this stuff happen, because it also ultimately could lead to further escalations. We're already in a very dangerous place. But so far, the Russian Federation has responded in this manner rather than engaging in a direct tit for tat. And Putin's coming under a lot of pressure to do exactly what you suggested he might do. I hope he continues to resist that pressure, because he's not dealing with sane or rational people on the other side of the table. They're not sane or rational. And these people in Washington and Brussels and other major Western capitals are completely bonkers. I'm not a psychiatric expert, but my opinion as a layperson is these people have gone off the deep end. There are no adults in the room, and the only restraint being shown, despite the narrative that's coming out of the Western media, which is that it's Putin who's crazy and reckless. In fact, it's the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians who have shown strategic restraint and patience. Our side is just seems hell bent on destroying the world. Frankly, it's astonishing and very, very alarming.
I go back to this situation in southern Russia, and when you're dealing with an investigation, you've been a journalist. You know that motive, opportunity, and who benefits the most. Well, what are the odds that Victoria Nuland says that Russia will be forced to pay a price? Just recently on RT, there was an interview with an Israeli official who says, and he was really pissed. He was talking about how Israel will make Russia pay for taking the side of Gaza, and then he was just going on this tirade about Russia is going to be forced to pay. And then you have Joe Biden talking about Russia paying, and this took place on the Caspian Sea. That was close to the Caspian Sea, which Iran and Russia are already talking about running a pipeline through, and also a new waterway through, and it happens in a Muslim majority republic in Russia, and it only targeted so-called Jews and Christians. this has all the signs that this was intended to start ethnical and religious strife to try to weaken Russia on its southern flank.
I agree with all of that. Ultimately, does it mean that they are behind it? That any of these Western forces are behind it? Not necessarily, but as I said, it stinks to high heaven. I just want to say something about this Mossad character. Threatening Russia. I mean, if these people, again, were adults, if they actually thought rationally, they would understand that Russia could do far more damage to Israel than Israel can do to Russia. Russia doesn't have to actually attack Israel either with conventional weapons or with nuclear weapons, of which it has many more than Israel, and including much more sophisticated delivery systems than Israel has. It has hypersonic weapons, for God's sake. But it doesn't have to do any of those things to cause immense damage to Israel. All it has to do is provide some of this conventional weaponry to Syria. The Syrian government wants to recover the Golan Heights, which under international law belonged to Syria and were occupied by Israel in 1967 and then illegally annexed by Israel under Israeli law. So Syria has plenty of motivation to attack Israel. It's constantly getting attacked by Israel. What if the Russians gave, the Syrians their new S-500 air defense systems, which are the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world? You might start seeing some Israeli F-35s fall out of the sky. What if they gave them some Iskander missiles, which travel thousands of kilometers a mile per hour, or supersonic, bordering upon hypersonic missiles? The Israelis aren't going to be able to take those out. What if they start giving the Syrians their most advanced artillery systems, long-range precision artillery systems, which are coming onto the battlefield of Ukraine and have been tested in combat? These people are nuts. I mean, the Mossad officially and publicly is threatening the Russian Federation when the Russian Federation has, close, important strategic allies in West Asia who would love nothing more than to get their hands on Russia's most sophisticated weaponry. I think this is, again, just emblematic of the fact that the people who are running the state of Israel and Western countries generally are behaving in ways that are destined to result in the end of Western hegemony. They are, if they were thinking rationally, and even if their singular goal was to maintain global dominance, they would not behave the way they're behaving.
So do you think that there will be a regional conflagration there? Because it seems like Netanyahu is ready to just say to hell with everything. I'm going to do any and everything that I can to stay in power as long as I can so that I don't go to jail.
Yeah, Rasheed, I hope I'm wrong, man, but I really don't see how this is going to play out other than by means of a major war, because there's no suggestion that the Biden administration is prepared to put a stop to this. So the one little glimmer of hope I have is that the defense minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, who, by the way, is now the subject of a request for an arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court, I read that he just flew to Washington for very important talks. The statements he was making suggested that there's a decision going to be made in close consultation with the Biden administration about what to do in regard to Hezbollah. Let us hope that the Biden administration says we will not countenance a full-scale war with Hezbollah, because first of all, that is going to result in massive damage to Israel. There's no way you can win that war without major support from the United States, and there are no people in the United States who want part of that war, very few people. And you're probably going to cause Iran to become involved directly. And then we're into a disastrous war, not only for the region, but for the global economy. Let's hope that that's the message that's being delivered to Yoav Gallant. So far, the indications are not promising because, the administration officials went out of their way a few days ago to say to the press that they told Netanyahu that in the event of a full-scale war with Hezbollah, the United States would have Netanyahu's back. So effectively, whether it's intentional or accidental. They are incentivizing Netanyahu. When you say that, you're incentivizing Netanyahu to go to full-scale war with Hezbollah and potentially with Iran. That seems to be the direction we're heading. And given the psychology of these people, their psychology is we must dominate the region. We must strike terror into the hearts of anybody who potentially resists our domination. Given that that's their psychology, I don't know how they don't attack Hezbollah in a full-scale war, because if they don't, it will send a message to people throughout the region that they cannot dominate Hezbollah. And if they can't dominate Hezbollah, how are they going to dominate Iraq? How are they going to dominate Iran? How are they going to dominate Yemen? So they're, with this sort of supremacist ideology that they have, given the challenge that's been laid down to their hegemony in the region, I don't see how these people can be persuaded not to pursue a full-scale war.
Biden says that he will bag Israel and her moves. Now, we heard that and we know that, but what are the U.S. Leaders thinking? Because Russia said that they would bag Iran, and Russia has a strategic partnership with Iran, which also just signed a strategic partnership with Vietnam and a strategic partnership with North Korea, and a defense pact with North Korea, which a lot of people do not equate means a defense pact with China, because China has had a defense pact with North Korea since the Korean War. So why aren't the so-called adults, quote unquote, in the Western world anywhere in the building making policy? Because this can lead to a direct global confrontation right there.
I've been saying for years, Rasheed, that impunity makes people stupid. It's not that they've never had to be held accountable for their crimes and their incompetence, and so they don't appear to have any incentive to think or behave rationally. They think they can get away with anything, no matter how disastrous it may be. I mean, look at the Iraq War. By any rational measure, the Iraq War was not only illegal and profoundly immoral, it was, from a strategic perspective, an absolutely asinine thing for the United States to do. It created terrorism. It actually ended up fomenting terrorism in the region, not restraining or defeating terrorism. It caused massive hostility towards the United States in the region. Iraq actually was, its government, that of Saddam Hussein, was hostile to Iran, which the United States was trying to contain. And now you have a government in Iraq that is aligned with Iran. And you have militant groups in Iraq that are firing upon Israel and are being armed by the Iranians. This is much likely to have less likely to have happened if the United States had not invaded Iraq and allowed the majority Shia population to basically take control of the government. But they never paid a price for this. Who was held accountable for the Iraq War? Was Bush held accountable? Rumsfeld? Cheney? Nobody. And so the lesson that the elites in the United States learned is we can pretty much get away with everything. And this is why I think we're seeing this massive stupidity again and again. The thing that gives me the greatest hope that there won't be a war, although I think we're probably heading in that direction, there won't be a full-scale war in West Asia, is that I think the Americans do understand, the Biden administration, the Pentagon, and especially the economic elite of the United States, the business elite, understand that if there's a full-scale war in the region, that the price of oil is going to go through the roof. And this is going to be extremely damaging to the U.S. economy. And the last thing Biden needs right now, with his historically low approval rating and Donald Trump consistently ahead of him in the polls, is a huge increase in the price of gasoline and all the inflation that's going to occasion in the United States. Inflation is already a problem, and a lot of Americans are struggling with it. So I think that they are acutely aware of, and hopefully that will cause them to tell Israel to restrain itself.
But when we look at it sanely and rational, we know that these people are irrational and insane. And right now they see dwindling power. They're seeing their influence being rebuffed globally. They see the attack on their monetary system. their political system, the so-called entirety of the rules-based order. And when you ruled so fully without any consequences for decades upon decades, nearly a century, and you start seeing everything that you once enjoyed and thought that it was a God-given right to start crumbling, I don't think rationality is a part of their thinking anymore. So I don't think that people will have sane or rational conversation about this, because all one has to do is look at their policy, and then you can say, well, why did they do that? This led to this, this, and this, and then they continue to double and quadruple down on these failed policies. And to me, that is like a person that's so desperate, just taking something, throwing it up against the wall just to see if it'll stick. I believe that's where we are in the political makeup of the Western world. They have no viable plans, and they can't accept anything that's viable that is being proposed by their so-called enemies, because they have been smitten with arrogance and hubris.
Yeah, so I agree completely that I think you've fairly characterized most of the people in the American and other Western elites. Absolutely. But there are some voices within the elites, a few, who seem to be sane, not moral, not ethical, but sane. So I'm going to talk about one in particular. A friend of mine forwarded to me an op-ed that was written by a person by the name of Ben Rhodes, who was a senior advisor in the Obama administration and remains very firmly ensconced in the Democratic Party elite. I think it was published in Foreign Policy magazine, which is very much a neoconservative publication, read by and for the U.S. foreign policy elite. And in it, he basically said, he was quite direct in saying this, that the era of U.S. hegemony is over. And what we should be trying to do right now is manage our relationship with countries that we can no longer dominate. He was basically acknowledging the multipolar reality that now confronts the United States and its Western vassals. And let's remember that Obama, for all his flaws, and I agree completely with Dr. Cornel West when he said Obama was a war criminal. The man was a war criminal, no question about it, for a whole variety of reasons. But Obama actually showed some sanity at various points in foreign policy. So, for example, he refused to arm Ukraine. Look where that's gotten us. Okay, he also entered into the Iran nuclear deal. And by the way, when he refused to arm Ukraine, he acknowledged that Russia had, as he put it, escalation dominance in the region, and that's been proven to be 100% correct. It was Trump who then just threw that caution to the wind. So he entered also, Obama, in the nuclear deal with Iran, which was working. The International Atomic Energy Agency said when Trump took office and threatened to tear it up, that Iran was complying with the deal and that it wasn't on the threshold of developing a nuclear weapon. So Trump comes along, destroys the deal. Iran is now on the threshold of developing a nuclear weapon. I've heard experts like Scott Ritter say they could do it within a matter of a few weeks if they wanted to. And right now they've got a lot of incentive to do it because of Israel's behavior. So Obama was, in some ways, he was a voice of reason. Was he a neocon? Sure. Did he believe in Western supremacy? 100%. Did he violate systematically international law? To be certain, he did. But he at least had the capability to stop before going over the precipice, right? So there are people like that, including Ben Rhodes, in the Democratic Party. Right now, they're not driving the bus, which is the scary part. It's the lunatics you talked about. These psychopathic megalomaniacs, they're in charge. But these voices are starting to emerge, which hopefully will pull us back from the brink of nuclear war, because that's frankly where we are right now. And this thing that happened in Dagestan moved us inches closer to that horrifying possibility.
And as we talk more on that situation, I want to bring us back to the Israeli situation for a minute. Why aren't a lot of pundits talking about that Israel is bankrupt and that it is living off the gratuity of the U.S., the UK, and the Europeans? In so many words, it has become a parasite, because it is siphoning off the tax dollars while other people in other societies are suffering. The government can see fit to give the tax dollars to maintain Israel. Why isn't that being talked about or discussed?
It is actually more and more being talked about. You see some people in, Mearsheimer's getting a lot of, he's definitely a person who has that view and is not shy about sharing it, right? That Israel has become just a black hole for American money. The Israelis have a better standard ordinary Israelis have a better standard of life, or did prior to this genocide, than ordinary Americans, for example, with their national healthcare system. And now they're the dependence. Israel was always dependent upon the United States generosity. So Israel is the biggest recipient of U.S. foreign aid by a wide margin in American history. And Obama secured a deal, even though Netanyahu hated Obama. Obama showered Israel with money. He did a deal that entitled Israel to $3.8 billion a year in military aid for 10 years. Just towards the end of his second term, Obama did that deal. And that may not sound like a lot to relative to the U.S. budget, but for Israel, a country that small, $3.8 billion a year, it was already dependent. There's no way Israel could have the quality of life that it has and the military dominance that it enjoyed for many years without billions of dollars annually in U.S. military aid. And now its dependence upon the United States has skyrocketed because, for example, it's now facing sanctions from Turkey. It is now having great difficulty, having products delivered to and from its ports because of the actions of Ansar Allah and other resistance groups in West Asia. It has pulled hundreds of thousands of able-bodied men out of the economy in order to fight this genocidal war in Gaza and the losing conflict with Hezbollah in northern Israel. Hundreds of thousands of people, John Mearsheimer, I think, said in excess of 500,000 Israelis have left Israel. Last week, the Hezbollah published a video, this extraordinary 9 to 10 minute video, which showed footage taken by its drones over sensitive military targets in Israel. And I understand that the next day, 68,000 Israelis left from Ben Gurion Airport, which was apparently a record number of departures. So who are these people who are leaving? It's the people in Israel who are living paycheck to paycheck. These people they're not really in a position to just get on a plane at the drop of a hat and leave the country. The people who are leaving are probably the ones who are most highly educated and occupy positions of managerial positions, professional positions in the economy. Their departure all of this is coming together to cause devastating damage to the Israeli economy. And the only way it can be sustained is with ever larger amounts of U.S. and other Western forms of aid. I think that's just not sustainable for Israel. Israel's in serious trouble right now.
Yeah. I want to bring something to the screen 1 second, if you will allow me.
Sure.
This is pertaining to what you were talking about the nuclear deal and everything else. So I'll bring it up on the screen. Hold on 1 second, and let's see if we can play it.
The United States is going to start sanctioning our allies and their banks and their businesses because we walked away from a deal, and we're going to force them to do what we want them to do. Even
I don't know
if
you can hear
to the
I can.
deal we came to. Are you?
I got what it said.
That is a
Can you hear it?
Yep.
Okay, let me finish it. Okay, because I couldn't hardly hear it. All right.
Quickly, my friends, for them to walk away from Ukraine, where they are already very dicey and ready to say, well, we've done our bit. They were ready, in many cases, to say, well, we're the ones paying the price for your sanctions. It was Obama who went out and actually put together a sanctions regime that had an impact. I went to China. We persuaded China, don't buy more oil. We persuaded India and other countries to step back. Can you imagine trying to sanction them after persuading them to put in place sanctions to bring Iran to the negotiating table? And when they have not only come to the table, but they made a deal, we turn around and nix the deal and then tell them you're going to have to obey our rules on the sanctions anyway. That is a recipe very quickly, my friends, business people here, for the American dollar to cease to be the reserve currency of the world, which is It's already bubbling out there.
So this goes
Are you
this
kidding
goes
me?
right along with what you were saying. This was John Kerry talking, and he was talking about how if America pulled out of the nuclear deal, how after um, promising this and that to other nations, if they came into the nuclear deal and put pressure on Iran to accept the nuclear deal, and then after getting everybody on board and then getting Iran to sign the nuclear deal, America pulls out of the nuclear deal and then threatens to sanction the very people that she brought to the nuclear deal. This, my dear, is a recipe for the end of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Now, isn't that exactly what took place after? I mean, to the T, what he described, that if America and her partners did X, Y, and Z, that this would lead to the demise of the dollar. And then we have, and you know, I'm no fan of Biden, but Trump pulled out of that nuclear deal. Biden has stayed out of that nuclear deal, and we're looking at a downward spiral of dollar hegemony and the collapse of Western power. Wasn't this forewarned by John Kerry in that speech right there?
Yeah, I don't know when he said that. It's the first time I've ever seen that speech. Do you know what year that was? It's very interesting that he said that.
You know what I'll do? I'll just I will text you. I'll send it to you. Email the entirety of the speech.
But I'm guessing that it was because the way he's talking, it sounds like Trump had not yet pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal or had just done it. So this is probably, I'm guessing, no, back, or is it more recent?
This was done right, I believe, right when the Biden, not Biden, but Obama was ending his presidency.
Okay, and there was.
I think this took place right as in the last days of the president.
Because Trump, from the very beginning, when he was running in 2016, he made it very clear he was going to destroy that deal. Yeah, that makes sense. So, of course, this is all come true. By the way, this is just I'm slightly more encouraged than I was before, because it sounds to me like John Kerry is also a bigwig in the Democratic Party who's not lost his mind. So it's not just Ben Rhodes. Hopefully, John Kerry, trying to talk some sense to Genocide Joe and Blinken. But yeah, this is exactly what's happened, and what I think, just sort of flesh out what Kerry was saying, was in order for you to reimpose U.S. sanctions or those sanctions to be effective, you are going to have to impose what lawyers call secondary sanctions on anybody other, including potentially allies who continue to do business with Iran. So, for example, who buy their oil. And, that, of course, is going to infuriate them. They're going to view the United States as being a completely unreliable partner. And the only way they are going to be able to protect themselves from this kind of perfidy, basically betrayal by their close ally or supposed close ally of the United States in the future, is to reduce their dependence on the U.S. dollar. So it's very interesting. It sounds like, yeah, there were some sane people in the Democratic Party who foresaw this before Trump became president. Unfortunately, their voices were completely disregarded. And now you have a situation in which the U.S. dollar hegemony is in rapid decline. That's not a process, by the way, that can play out over a few years. I mean, the U.S. dollar is so important to global commerce, and the U.S. and the global financial system is so much within the vice grip of the U.S. government that it's probably going to take decades to completely replace the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency. But that process doesn't have to be completed for the United States to suffer severe consequences. As gradually over time, the demand for U.S. dollar assets falls, right? Countries start engaging in trade using non-U.S. currencies. So there's less demand for the U.S. dollar. Gradually, what's going to happen is the United States is going to have to pay more interest in order to borrow money. And right now, it has enormous debt, and it has an enormous need for incurring further debt because it runs a deficit, a gigantic deficit, primarily due to its out-of-control military spending. So All it has to happen if the United States to suffer severe economic consequences is for the price of its debt to gradually rise, the cost of borrowing money to gradually rise over time until it becomes significant. So long before the U.S. dollar has been completely supplanted as the global reserve currency, the United States could find itself in a financial crisis. Basically, that's the bottom line. Because of this process of de-dollarization that John Kerry foresaw and that has already begun. It's like you can hardly, every time the BRICS members meet, they put out a communique in which they talk about the need to conduct trade in their own currencies. Every day, every time they meet. This has become a central preoccupation of the global South, is how do we free ourselves of the U.S. dollar servitude? And that's a strategic threat to the United States. It's something that will have game-changing implications for the balance of power in the world.
I was going to bring up something about China, and I know time is of the essence, but I wanted to just throw a curveball and go into Africa, because as you said before, France is losing its position, but it is not only France, it's multiple nations of the Western world. They're losing their position there. And speaking of that, we see the United States still not completely removing herself from her bases in Africa. And a lot of people think that this is to fight Russia and combat Iran's growing influence, and specifically to try to blunt China, because Africa has all of the resources that anybody could want. And from what was told to me, that the United States is becoming more desperate. And I want you to listen. This is a short clip by my guy, Scott Bennett. And I want you to listen to what he has to say about this. I've interviewed Scott Bennett about 3 or 4 times. I was even kicked off YouTube 3 times for interviewing him. So I want you to listen to this.
Well, let's turn our attention now to the African continent, because it appears U.S. authorities are still hopeful that their ties with Niger may be salvaged. Now, this comes as the West African country has ordered all American soldiers to pack up and leave.
We'll make the most of the situation that was presented to us, but the intent is, in Niger, to draw down to a level that the Nigerians can live with.
More than a decade ago, America began to increase its military presence in the region. And the $100 million American drone facility in the country's north houses around 1,000 personnel. In March, Niger terminated its military relations with Washington. Nigerian officials explained their decision, stating that the deal was imposed on the nation and does not serve the interests of the people. This past month, authorities from both countries began arranging the evacuation of American soldiers.
You mentioned that we were forced to leave Niger. We will leave Niger, Senator, but as you know, what we do in order terrorism thrives in ungoverned spaces. And what we typically do is to try to help countries develop their own capability to control their sovereign spaces.
It's never about raising Africa up or doing low-intensity conflict or counterterrorism. It was always about feeding the empire. And Africa has finally overthrown that enslavement and has sought to cleanse themselves of this control. And now you see the West panicking and desperately trying to negotiate any way to stay in Africa so they can continue their nefarious activities. There's nothing good that the United States brings to Africa whatsoever. And I think they realize in Africa that Russia is a far better friend and partner, because they are genuinely interested in the elevation of Africa. And I would say this too, Africa, well, the United States contractors and military that are in country, that are on the base, are running out of food and medicine and supplies because they've established no flights coming in and out. This is an opportunity for a public relations victory for Russia, as far as I'm concerned. That's how I look at it. And I think keeping the West out, stopping any military presence from coming in is a very wise move, because they do not have any designs to help Africa, only parasitically exist off of it.
Demonstrations against the presence of American troops have occurred often around the country, hundreds rallied in Agadez, home to the UAV Airbase 201, to demand that Washington's military leave. The protests were coordinated by a coalition of parties that back the military rule of law that took power last year. Kala Karamu, a former Nigerian ambassador, believes that if the United States wishes to engage with Niger, it must consider the interests of the people.
The position of the Nigerian people and their leaders has been very clear. We never said that we would not negotiate with anyone. We have never identified with whom we're going to negotiate and on what basis. We have a problem of our own and we want to solve this problem. That is to say, we want to ensure the security of our territory ourselves, and we want to have partners who are ready to respect the conditions under which we want to establish this cooperation. If the United States of America decides to revise its copy and adapt it to the necessities or needs of the Nigerian people, obviously we will discuss that. But there is a principle that is immutable. We don't want foreign troops on our territory. This has created so many problems for us. The fact is that no country, regardless of our ties with it, has the right to come and settle on our territory without observing the agreements defined by our Constitution.
Okay, now let me put it like this. America has bases in Colombia. She's been fighting a drug war for 50 to 60 plus years, and it's only gotten worse. Look at Haiti, the situation in Haiti. Look at Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Afghanistan, and the list goes on and on. So America continues to talk about fighting terror, but terror continues to follow her. And I'm not just speaking about America in general. I'm talking about the whole of the Western unified position. Why is it hard for them to recognize that other people have the right to self-determination and they don't need Western boots on their ground? Because it would be an outrage if Mali had troops in London, or if the Democratic Republic of the Congo had a military base in California. Why are Western people so outraged at the thought of someone else having a base on their territory, but they have no problems with putting multiple bases in other people's territories, dominating them?
Well, you said a lot there, so I'm just trying to unpack it, but I believe, and I can't prove this, but I know that the U.S. government and other Western governments have very capable legal advisors speaking to them on a regular basis. They have armies of lawyers at their disposal. I have no doubt that the American government or other Western governments understand the fundamentals of international law. And, if a sovereign state says, get out, unless they have some kind of treaty obligation which deprives them of the right to expel your forces, you have to get out. So I just think they don't care. They don't care about international law. They don't care about the right of self-determination of peoples in Africa in particular. And a lot of people in the West, I think, have been either brainwashed by this mentality that, people of European origin have an inherent divine right to dominate the world, or they took a practical view of this. And the practical reality, which some people in the West, I think, understand, is the reason why Africa is so poor relative to the West, and the West is so materially prosperous relative to Africa, is that we have been basically pillaging and raping and destroying and dominating African countries for centuries. Africa should be every bit as wealthy. It has the human potential. It has the natural resource potential. It has ancient civilizations. It should be every bit as wealthy and prosperous, perhaps even more so than Western countries are. The only reason they have we went over there, we deprived African peoples of their right. We carved up, the continent in ways that actually made no sense from a sort of ethnical or religious or historical perspective. We divided and we conquered. We inserted our forces there, and then they protected the business interests of Western capitalists who have systematically pillaged and destroyed Africa. And the problem Africans had for a long time is that there was no other game in town, certainly after the Soviet Union fell. When the Soviet Union existed, there were a lot of liberation movements in Africa which were had allied themselves with the Soviet Union. And, for example, the ANC and the Black South Africans who fought against apartheid. The Soviet Union was on their side. It was Western countries that were on the side of the apartheid regime until the very end, when its demise became inevitable. And then so this other alternative disappeared when the Soviet Union fell, but now there is another game in town, and that game is Russia and China, who have a very different way of dealing with African nations to this very day than the West. They have a view that they should enter into win-win relationships with their partners in the global South. They can enter into mutually beneficial trade agreements and, foreign investment agreements, whereas the West has the view that it should be hierarchical and entirely exploitative, their relationships with countries in the global South. So now that they have this other opportunity, they're saying, yes, we want that other deal. We want the approach that China and Russia take to dealing with us. We're fed up with you, and you have to get out. And it was very interesting to hear the language at the beginning of that RT report. One of the American officials was quoted as saying, we are going to work with the people in Niger to get the troop levels down to a point that they can live with. What part of zero troops does this lunatic not understand? They don't want any troops, no troops, okay? He thinks that they are going to be persuaded to tolerate an indefinite U.S. military presence if they remove like 1,000 soldiers or a few hundred soldiers from it, because it's ridiculous. These people live on planet Mars. And then you heard Lloyd Austin, who, like all, defense secretaries of the past 20 years, is a pathological liar, saying, we were going to eventually get out. He said, we're going to eventually get out. But then he said, but the problem is that our departure will create a vacuum and terrorists exploit the vacuum. Well, this is just a prescription for endless U.S. military presence. And we've seen this in Iraq. This is what's going on in Iraq. It's not been widely reported, but, after the genocide began in Gaza, Iraqi militias, Shia militias who are allied with Iran, started attacking U.S. military bases in the region. And the Biden administration responded by escalating matters very seriously in Iraq. I was in Baghdad in March, and I spoke to people there who are associated with resistance movements in Iraq. And they said the Americans just went hog wild and started like drone striking civilian targets in Baghdad and other major cities, and people became alarmed. So the Iraqi government comes along, and also apparently the Iranians became involved and told the Iraqi militias, stop attacking U.S. military bases. Okay, and I know for a fact that the Iraqi government said this to them. We are going to go and negotiate with the Americans a timetable for their departure. Okay, that was like 4 or 5 months ago. And the Iraqi militia said, fine, suspend our attacks on U.S. military bases and give you a few months to work out a timetable. Well, guess what? In the last few days, the Iraqi militias have resumed attacking. They haven't gone full bore yet, but they've done some symbolic attacks that haven't caused serious damage to send a message to the Americans. We know that you're playing us. You don't intend to leave, and we're warning you. We're serious. You must get out. So this is exactly the game that they are going to play in Africa. They're going to engage in this dialogue, which is intended never to be solved. It's just intended to go on forever. There's never going to be a proper moment for the Americans to fully depart. But the problem the Americans have now is that there's another game in town, and they don't have to put up with this anymore. Not in Africa, not in West Asia, not in any part of the world. There's a new sheriff in town, and they're just going to have to accept the reality. And if they don't, we're going to end up in a damn nuclear war.
Mm-hmm. And I think some people are betting on a nuclear war. You have these lunatics that actually believe that the United States can win a nuclear war, which is absolutely insane. There's no winning of a nuclear war, but if one were to put their bets down, Russia has far more advanced air defense systems, a larger nuclear arsenal, and is about 3 times the size of the United States. So if you were going to put your hat in somebody winning, it would be that with that nation with a vast superior missile inventory, air defense system, and it's 3 times the size of your country. Now, before we close out, Dimitri, I would be remiss if I did not ask you about where do you think things are headed in the South China Sea and in Asia, because it seems like this thing is starting to build up a lot of momentum now.
Well, there too, you don't really see any indication of sanity on the part of U.S. policymakers. They continue to give weapons to Taiwan. They recently, announced another batch of weapons to Taiwan, and the Chinese responded by engaging in very conspicuous military exercises in the Taiwan Strait. And they continue to send their naval vessels into disputed waters, provoking. There's been numerous times in the past few years where there was almost direct military confrontation between Chinese naval vessels and U.S. naval vessels. And you have idiots like Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, sending our Lilliputian naval assets. We have like this almost inconsequential navy, but we send them along not because we're going to actually make a difference in terms of the military balance of power in the Taiwan Straits, but purely to aggravate the Chinese. It's total insanity. You have U.S. military planners who are openly saying, eventually we're going to war against China. It's an extremely dangerous situation right now in the South China Sea. And let's be very clear about this. This is not a war that the United States can win. It's going to get absolutely obliterated, even if it doesn't go nuclear. It's going to get obliterated. The United States cannot maintain a naval presence in the South China Sea, in the Straits of Taiwan, that can survive attacks, land-based and air attacks and naval attacks by the Chinese Navy. You'd be fighting a war that is a logistical nightmare for the United States, and which is exactly what we're seeing in Ukraine, by the way. When Obama said that the Russians had escalation dominance there, where are the weapons coming from to keep the Ukrainians in the fight? They're coming from across the Atlantic predominantly. And then they have to, once they enter Western Ukraine or Southern Ukraine through Romania, they have to get to the front. And the Russians have an opportunity to attack them. Whereas the Russians, their weaponry and their men are coming from just across the border. So for them, this is a much less logistically challenging conflict than it is for Ukraine, because Ukraine is depending upon a source of weaponry that is across the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, you have the same situation in China. If you try to send major U.S. naval forces into the South China Sea, they have to be supplied. They have to be protected, and they have to be supplied. U.S. forces have to be supplied. Where are they going to come from, the supplies? And the troops are going to rotate in and out. This is a much easier war for China to fight than it is for the United States. It's doomed to lose. And so this is, again, the United States, it will find itself in a losing situation inevitably in a conventional war. And then the risk is that it decides to go nuclear to avoid a strategic defeat. And let's remember, the United States is the only country that's ever used nukes. And it used them twice on civilian targets. It knowingly incinerated tens of thousands of Japanese children when Japan was on the verge of surrender. So people should be very, very concerned, not about Russia or China going nuclear. The real danger is that the United States government goes nuclear because it engages in a conventional war that it is doomed to lose.
And closing on that, there was a report came out last year from the U.S. DOD and other intelligence services saying that China has a shipbuilding lead over the United States. They have a shipbuilding capacity that outstrips the United States and NATO by over 200 times. That is absolutely insane to try to go to war on this person's front doorstep, and they outstrip you in manufacturing of warships, you and your allies, by over 200 times. You can't win a war like that. That's insanity. Would you say in close?
Absolutely. And the Chinese don't need to out construct the West when it comes to naval vessels, because most of the fire is not going to be coming from sea-based assets. It's going to be coming from the coast of China. They don't have to send naval vessels into the Taiwan Strait to devastate any U.S. military assets in the waters off of China. They can use their air force. They can use their missile systems. But the fact that they can outproduce the U.S. should be like the nail in the coffin of any stupid notion that the U.S. can win that war. It cannot win that war. And if you listen to independent military experts from the United States, they're adamant about this. People like Daniel Lewis, Lieutenant Colonel Scott Ritter, Douglas McGregor, Mearsheimer himself, who is no friend of China, but who was educated at West Point. They're all in agreement that this idea that the U.S. can prevail in such a war is utter insanity. So again, as the risks multiply around the world, it becomes almost inevitable that we're going to end up in a full-blown global conflagration. So I cannot stress enough that people need to be prioritizing this issue. We need to force Western governments to engage in serious de-escalation before it's too late.
And once again, my brother, you kick butt. Thank you for joining me. I'll send you a link to the show in a few minutes, man. I really, really appreciate it, Dimitri.
It's always great talking to you, brother.
All right, be safe out there, man.
You too, brother.
Everybody, all right. Everybody, Dimitri gave us a little bit of himself. I mean, this guy kicks butt. He's everywhere, and he's hearing everything. He's interviewing some of the people that you want to be interviewed. I'm talking about the resistance leaders. So go sign up to his channel over at Dimitri Lascaris. He has a YouTube channel. Please do that. Also, I want to tell everybody we'll be having shows all week long. We just did a Patreon drop last night before last. We just did a channel members drop last night with new videos. Friday, we'll be having Scott Ritter on the show at 11 Central, 12 p.m. Let me say that again. Friday, we'll be having Scott Ritter on the platform at 11 a.m., 12 p.m. Eastern time, but it's 11 Central time. I want to thank each and every one of you for your time on all of the platforms. I see that that I've been being knocked off a few other things on my phone, but it's all good because this was an excellent conversation. And before I go off the air, I have to say something, and this is something to my mom. All right, hey mom, I gotta put this up there because you're gonna laugh about this. All right, let me go to this real quick. This guy Kabari is trying to beat me to saying what I normally say. For everybody who doesn't know, Kabari is my baby boy, and he loves his nana more than anything. His nana is his heart and soul. And he swears up and down that he's her baby boy. So he want, and you know, when I close out, I'll say, "Mama, your baby boy loves you more than life." So, so he wanted to beat me to saying it. So he put this in the chat. This is unreal, Mom. You made that monster there. That's your beast that you have to deal with, because that boy is Nana or nothing. Listen, everybody. Listen. Thank you all for joining me on the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, anywhere on God's green earth. This is your platform for education, elevation, and edification. This is the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host and your brother and your friend, Rasheed. Go over to the Patreon and listen. I'm going to be dropping more interviews that I have done in the past years that nobody has really even heard. We just dropped an hour-and-a-half interview in two parts with Ray McGovern from 2015. And if you listen to it, it sounds like he's been interviewed for what's going on right now. I told you I'm lapping these people when it comes to some of these people they're talking to, because I dealt with them 2015, 2014, 2013, 2012, 2011 times. That's when I dealt with a lot of them. So we just released that, and we're talking about the very issues that are taking place right now. You got to get that fire. Also, check out the new drop that's for the channel members. I love and appreciate every minute that you spend with me. I want to thank God for you, and I want to thank God that we are able to converse in such a manner. We go out the same way that we always come in, with love in our hearts for each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that we have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous. Hey, mama, you're real, baby boy. I love you more than life. Deuces, everybody. I'm out of here. Peace.